Today, we're going to tear down a really fascinating, kind of dangerous myth, which is the idea that hitting a specific magic number in your bank account somehow equals permanent security. It doesn't. So let's jump right in and look at the brutally honest math of financial survival.
Okay, let's start by picturing a very specific, amazing moment. Imagine logging into your bank account, the screen loads, and you finally see that massive milestone staring right back at you, $100,000. I mean, for years, you've probably been conditioned to believe that the first 100K is the hardest, right? And that getting there means you are finally, truly safe.
So you lean back in your chair, let out this huge sigh of relief, and you feel like you've finally crossed the finish line. You've escaped the gravity of broke. But what if I told you that this exact moment, the very second you feel the absolute safest, is actually the most incredibly dangerous phase of your entire financial life?
To see why, let's look at part 1, the $100,000 illusion.
To understand this illusion, we have to recognize a fundamental truth. Getting wealthy requires taking risks, but staying wealthy requires a completely different and honestly kind of terrifying psychological skill set. Think about it like construction. If you're building the Empire State Building, you absolutely must dig an incredibly deep hole for a massive foundation first. But most people, they try to build a skyscraper on a standard 6-inch concrete slab. The building goes up super fast, sure, but without a deep understanding of the basics like cash flow, it immediately starts to tilt. You end up creating this precarious leaning tower of suburbia. We literally see this all the time. It's exactly how a 24-year-old millionaire basketball player ends up losing everything to his inner circle and is washing cars for minimum wage a decade later. High income means absolutely nothing without a deep foundation.
That brings us to our second section, the trap of complexity.
You see, once people accumulate just a little bit of wealth, something really funny happens. They get bored. Incredibly bored. They look at their simple, effective financial habits and just decide they need to level up. Suddenly, investors think they need to be sexy instead of rich. They completely abandon simple, boring savings accounts and start talking endlessly about hedge funds, debating derivatives, and trading call options, mostly because they desperately want to sound smart at dinner parties. It's honestly just like watching two elementary school kids fiercely debating the exact string tension of their tennis rackets instead of just, going outside and practicing hitting the ball. Let me give you a real-world example. Take a guy named Mike. Mike was actually an impressive saver. He managed to stockpile $40,000. But then he became a rate chaser. He wasted his absolute most valuable asset, his time, playing this tedious, exhausting game where he moved his entire stash between different banks every 4 to 6 months just to squeeze out a tiny bit more interest. And his reward for all that sophisticated, time-consuming maneuvering? An extra $300 a year. If you break that down, that is 82 cents a day. He could have spent that time optimizing his broader investments, or, hey, just enjoying life with his family. But his ego desperately needed to feel like a financial genius. This actually perfectly mirrors the diet industry. Look, 99% of weight loss comes down to two brutally simple, incredibly boring rules: eat less and exercise more. But people totally ignore that. Instead, they get online and fiercely debate trans fats, keto, and paleo diets. Why? Because debating the tiny minutiae makes them feel satisfied. It creates this very clever illusion of progress without requiring them to actually put in the hard work of building a solid foundation. Which leads us straight into section 3. The brutal math of ruin. So, once your ego swells with that first 100 grand, you stop focusing on keeping your expenses low, and you start chasing those complex thrills. And that is exactly when you run headfirst into the absolute devil of finance, leverage. Simply put, leverage is taking on debt to make your existing money go further. And it is so dangerous because it hides behind rational optimism. I mean, most of the time the market goes up, right? So borrowing money to buy more seems perfectly logical. But leverage is the primary mechanism that takes routine, everyday risks and turns them into catastrophic, life-destroying events. Think about the math here for a second. The crucial takeaway is this. If a highly leveraged strategy has a 95% chance of a successful outcome, it inherently carries a 5% chance of being totally wrong. And if the cost of hitting that 5% is total financial annihilation, then the 95% upside is absolutely, unequivocally never worth the risk. A 5% chance of ruin basically guarantees you will experience that catastrophic downside at some point over your lifetime. The economist Hyman Minsky beautifully and tragically described how debt crises start. He said it's the exact moment you take on more debt than you can actually service. It's the Wile E. Coyote realization.
You know the old cartoon, right? He runs off the edge of the cliff, his legs are spinning frantically, and he's suspended in midair for just a few seconds, completely supported by the illusion of solid ground. Then, he looks down, realizes he is completely screwed, and falls straight to the canyon floor.
Here's the thing. When markets drop 30%, that's just normal capitalism. It happens. But for the highly leveraged person, it's not a normal fluctuation, it's a double wipeout. Not only do they lose everything, but crucially, they are entirely removed from the board precisely when the opportunities are the greatest. Think about a homeowner wiped out in 2009. They had zero chance of taking advantage of the incredibly cheap mortgages in 2010. They didn't just lose their money, they literally lost the ability to play the game when the game was at its most profitable.
Let's shift gears and look at Section 4, Lessons from the Casino. If we want to prevent becoming the coyote, we have to fundamentally shift our goal from maximizing our returns to literally guaranteeing our survival. And there's actually a great lesson here from professional Las Vegas card counters. The mechanics are brilliant. Step 1, they track the cards already played. Step 2, they calculate the mathematical probability of the remaining deck. And Step 3, they slightly tilt the odds in their favor. If there are more high cards left, they bet more. If more low cards, they bet less.
But here is the profound rule that destroys amateur card counters and everyday investors alike. Even when the math dictates that the odds are heavily in your favor, you must never bet every single chip. Why? Because probabilities are just that, probabilities. They aren't guarantees. There is absolutely no moment in a casino or in the stock market where you are so right that you can risk everything in front of you. The world is simply not that kind.
This directly brings up legendary investor Benjamin Graham's concept of the margin of safety. Graham, who famously mentored Warren Buffett, pointed out that the entire purpose of a margin of safety is actually rendering the forecast completely unnecessary. Uncertainty is a given, it's guaranteed. Therefore, you have to build so much room for error into your present plan that you don't even need to perfectly predict the future. You're just increasing that gap between what you think will happen and what can actually happen.
And that leads us to our final section, the psychology of survival.
Look, a financial plan is only useful if it can actually survive reality. And human reality, it's inherently messy and it's highly emotional. So successfully maintaining that massive margin of safety means overcoming a huge psychological hurdle. Every single investor has to learn the vital difference between a coldly rational, mathematically optimal strategy and a strategy that is actually reasonable. Academic finance is totally obsessed with the optimal spreadsheet. But you aren't a cold calculating spreadsheet. You're a human being. What you actually need is a strategy that simply maximizes how well you sleep at night.
I have a wild historical story that brilliantly illustrates this. Back in the 19th century, syphilis was fatal, no cure. But Dr. Julius Wagner Jehrig noticed that a severe fever sometimes burned out the bacteria. So what did he do? He started deliberately injecting his patients with strains of malaria to induce a raging severe fever. Now, from a purely clinical, mathematical standpoint, this was coldly rational, because it actually worked. But I think we can all agree it was absolutely not reasonable for the terrified patient enduring unimaginable side effects. Even the absolute titans of finance realize this difference. Take Harry Markowitz. The guy literally won the Nobel Prize for inventing modern portfolio theory and optimizing risk and return. But guess what he did with his own money in the 1950s? He completely ignored his own award-winning formulas. He chose a wildly unoptimized, basic 50-50 split between stocks and bonds. Why would he do that? Because his primary goal wasn't optimization, it was minimizing his future regret. He chose what was reasonable for his own human psychology over what was perfectly rational on paper.
And this is exactly why just hitting $100,000 won't automatically save you. Because if you design this hyper-aggressive plan that looks absolutely beautiful on a spreadsheet, you're going to fail when reality actually hits. Spreadsheets totally ignore human emotion. They don't calculate panic selling. They literally cannot model how you are going to feel staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., watching your net worth plummet 30%, and agonizing over whether you just permanently damaged your kid's future.
So to survive the brutal math of ruin, you have to acknowledge that your biggest point of failure is relying purely on optimism. Trying to predict exactly what you'll use your savings for assumes a perfectly predictable world, which we know doesn't exist. You actually have to save money for absolutely no reason at all. Think of it as saving for the financial equivalent of field mice, those tiny, unpredictable, entirely incomprehensible curveballs that life just throws at you when you're least prepared.
Hitting that first $100,000 isn't a magical shield, it is literally just the starting line, and protecting it requires profound humility and, honestly, a bit of financial paranoia. You've got to stop playing the game of maximizing returns and start playing the game of maximizing your endurance. So as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with this. What are you going to do this year to stop chasing these illusions and start building an unbreakable margin of safety into your own life? Give that some thought and start digging that deep foundation today.